There's no shortage of turn-based tactical RPGs in the indie scene, and there's some great ones too, but that said, it's a genre I typically do enjoy when I'm in the mood for it, and I must admit Arcadian Atlas caught my eye with its lovely art style that recalled memories of one of my favorites in the genre, Final Fantasy Tactics. It's a comparison that was inevitable with this game, and I know that's a generic answer for my favorite tactical RPG, but that was a really damn good game, okay? It's clear to me that Arcadian Atlas was inspired by that title, with its politically charged, emotionally invested script, familiar combat system, and, alright, to be honest, the soundtrack's a little weird, but more on that later. But to the surprise of no one, this is a politically driven tale of loss, triumph, and saxophones? Alright, I swear, I'll cut the soundtrack stuff for now. The game takes place in the world of Arcadia, a nation that is said to never forget the past. Now, I'd like to forget a few things myself, so I feel a bit bad for Arcadia. Two factions were at war for what seemed like an eternity, with one eventually coming out on top, leading to peace amongst the lands, at least for a while. You know where this is going. As a king faces his final days, an evil queen threatens to take over as she is rightful heir to the throne. Apparently the kids aren't entitled to be next in line for whatever reason, but one of them gets pissed off and takes matters into their own hands. Alright, so for as generic as this all sounds, honestly, there is some decent writing here and some solid twists and turns across this 10 to 25 hour campaign, depending on how many side objectives you take on. Or depending on if you remember to save, because apparently this game doesn't believe in autosave, at least at the time of this review, which totally screwed me over, but whatever, we're going to move on with the review, and I'm not going to get angry about it, I promise. Two lovers serve as the main characters of Arcadian Atlas, but as we all know, falling in love on the battlefield isn't the smartest thing, because as one of the characters in this game describes, he got to see his loved one try to put her intestines back into her stomach. Isn't that romantic? The cast is solid, and with some pretty interesting twists along the way, it's a story that doesn't break new ground, but manages to entertain enough, and even has a few funny moments. One nice little twist here is that throughout the story, players will need to make some crucial choices, and these can actually impact the story, or perhaps even decide who lives or dies, so choose wisely. As for that gameplay, pretty standard fare for a tactical RPG. You have a world map where you progress the story, and of course turn-based combat, which will feel pretty familiar to any fan of this genre. You'll begin battles by placing a set number of troops on the field, varying a bit depending on the battle. Once you select the character you would like to move, you'll be greeted with your standard directional menu, where you can choose to move, attack, and yes, you'll eventually get a skill tree to learn new skills as well. Certain actions will cost skill points, so that's worth keeping an eye on, and there's also an inspect option which allows for players to see a variety of information depending on which unit they have selected. The game does feature 12 different classes to master, quite a bit, and also a lot of skills for all those classes, along with some traps that can be set. I neglected to mention this game has a raccoon character, and I love the raccoon, who can fire arrows off from a distance. I'll say this about Arcadian Atlas, there's a lot of different ways for players to approach battles because of all of the different classes, and because of all of the different skills, and that can keep things interesting on the battlefield, despite the fact that it is pretty generic otherwise. Do you flank your enemies? Do you try to attack from the side or behind? Do you strike from a distance? How you approach things is up to you. This is a strategy game after all, and also a pretty tough one. Thankfully there's some difficulty options here, but even on the lower settings, I thought this game was challenging. Your eventual victory, at least hopefully you're victorious at one point or another, will net you some rewards, including new equipment and cash, with that cash then being spent on upgrading your party, recruiting new members, and of course buying new weaponry for all of them. Yes, there is a main hub area across the world map, which also hosts a tavern where you can pick up little side jobs, and this will extend the gameplay hours and earn you some sweet rewards. You can also chat it up if you want. It is a tavern, so I guess that makes sense. I could go on, but let's be real, you've all likely played a tactics game if you're watching this review, and there's again nothing too shocking here or new to be discussed in terms of gameplay systems, and I'm not saying that to degrade Arcadian Atlas in any ways. It knows what it wants to be, it knows what its target audience is, and maybe that's the right decision. That said, if you were looking for a ton of innovation in a tactical game, you really won't get that here, but you will get a pretty enjoyable experience for the most part, with some stressful moments, like when your character is dropped and then suddenly there's a timer above their head and they're gonna die if you don't hurry up. But my favorite aspect of Arcadian Atlas was just that it hit me in the feels with the nostalgia factor. The throwback visuals are lovely, the pixel art shines, and there's a decent variety to the backdrops that you'll fight across. I will say the text font chosen here wasn't my favorite, especially when the color lights up blue. That could be a bit hard to read on my old aging eyes, but the portrait art is nice, the landscapes look good, And y'all know how I feel about pixel art, it's pretty great here. However, when it comes to the soundtrack, I'm a little bit torn. Some of the pieces hit at the right moments with really beautiful melodies, something like you would expect out of this genre, but then there's others that are more like lounge jazz music. They feel completely out of place. I wasn't a fan at all. But mixed bag of emotions on the soundtrack, some good, some not so good. The sound effects at least are pretty great throughout, even if I must admit the sound of a wolf being struck by my sword or whatever I was using and letting out a whimper did make me a little sick to my stomach. All in all, Arcadian Atlas is a solid but somewhat safe turn-based RPG. It's not bad, it's a pretty decent value, I'd say. There's those 12 different classes throughout the game, well over those 100 skills to master, and the story will at least hold your interest. There's not a ton of accessibility options, but it's a good thing that there are difficulty options available to players, so they won't necessarily have to struggle through each and every battle. It's a decent strategy game for fans of the genre, but not one that you necessarily need to rush out and grab day one.